So welcome to both of you to the third year of the Independent Accountability Panel's review of the Energy Charter disclosures. In starting the meeting, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea and community. We pay our respect to their elders past and present and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people today. Thank you for your disclosure and congratulations on your commitment, particularly to the Energy Charter and the Better Together initiatives. I think you've shown great leadership in that area in remaining as a staunch member of the Charter. I think, and Cassandra Goldie from ACOS and Andrew Richards from the EUAA. Just by way of brief introduction, we've just been saying that it is regrettable that in 2021, we're still talking about the impact of COVID-19 on individuals, families and businesses around Australia, including energy businesses, as well as natural disasters in some areas, the upsurge in housing pressures and other financial stresses for people around the country. So as a result, we consider that the themes for this year's report are likely to be similar to those of last year, and we will build on those. Affordability of essential services, transition to net zero emissions by 2050 or preferably sooner, but with the consequent key issue that no customer should be left behind in that transition, particularly on the basis of affordability. And these themes have generally been confirmed by the stakeholder forums that we've held to date. So that's what we'd like to discuss with you and the other CEOs to get your perspective on the past year and those sorts of issues. So we have some questions for you, but just by way of opening, I'd invite you to make any introductory remarks or highlights of your disclosure, and then we can open it up for general discussion.
Well, thank you, Claire and Andrew and Cassandra. It's good to be here. It would be nice one day to do this in person. I don't know when that will actually happen.
Indeed.
I'm thinking the COVID will come to an end and it proves sustainably not to be the case. And that was really a theme we had over the course of the reporting year. I think at the start of 2020, we were hoping, well, by into 2021, we might be out the other side of this, and it's proved to be far more enduring and have got lots of twists and turns. For us, the piece that's made it work for our customers has been that we've made it work for our people. And what I mean by that is that we took our workforce by and large to working from home in 2020, and we've sustained that for the best part of 18 months now. And in Victoria, not all of our folks in New South Wales have spent that much time at home. But what's been really pleasing through that time is that the flexibility and support we've been able to provide our people has helped keep them in a reasonable state of mind. That has made it difficult. It's been difficult on occasion for people living on their own or people homeschooling at the same time as working. And we have notably and visibly made our workplace flexible in terms of hours and in terms of expectations, plus provided support to our leaders on items like mental health and just recognising warning signs and the ability to have wellbeing conversations with the team and do everything we can to put people in the best frame of mind themselves, which then helps support our customers. That is the secret sauce that to the extent that we've got one, it's really supporting our people and enabling them to be the best that they can be each day, no matter where they are. We have then seen, we've been really, impressed by what our people have come up with in ways to make the customer experience better. There are some old chestnuts that have been around this industry for a long time. Things like, well, it's winter, we're going to get high bills, and all the customers are going to call us and say, I've got a bill that I didn't expect. And one of the things that we're proud of is that we've actually thrown that challenge up and said, look, this has happened every year since the start of heaters. Surely there's a better answer. And this year we made progress. So we came up with usage alerts, pretty basic when you think about it, but usage alerts delivered by our SMS that just gave people understanding of what was coming, and just the understanding is a big part of a better experience. If something's not a surprise, much better experience. And that was a big part of contributing to another year of decreasing complaints, both direct at around 12% and via Ombudsman at about 26%. So that's something that we thought we did well, and it was really enabled by our people. And the flip side of that is we know it's been a COVID year. It's been a difficult year for some customers who've experienced financial, mental, other forms of hardship. And in that context, we feel we've really tested our existing hardship programs and found ways to enhance them. And that has been through enhancing the disconnection checklist, for example, putting in more contact steps, and going beyond that, and then just saying, well, in some cases, let's do a wellbeing visit. Let's send out a person to check that there's someone in that home and make sure that they're okay. And at times, we've even extended that into areas that we hadn't thought about in the past. So, for example, there are sites that we think are vacant that are known as unknown consumers, which do get just through normal process. If no one's there using energy, they do eventually get disconnection orders and move through the process. We decided to send out people and just check that whether there was anyone living in what we thought was a vacant site. Now, most of the time, that proved overall that we didn't need to do that, but it was pleasing to see our people come up with these sorts of ideas and test them and see if there was anything in them. And the ones where there is something in them, we just make them part of standard business process. So that's a little bit of a flavour of the way we've approached the year, and it's really been through the approach with our people that we feel we've made a better outcome for customers.
I suspect you would like to follow up on that, Cass.
I would, and good afternoon to both of you, Marks, and I do want to kick off by really acknowledging, with the sort of scale of the number of people that you provide supply to, it's been a really, phenomenal year to try and be across all the different parts of what we will be here to push you on, frankly, as well as support your workers and who have all the things that have been going on for them, as well as in many cases being very cognizant themselves of people in distress that they're trying to support. So there's really something in that. And so I just I'll go firstly to, you just touched on your approach to disconnections. I posited earlier, could we ever get to a point where we just didn't disconnect anybody? That wouldn't all be the responsibility of a retailer, but it could certainly be a partnership with government, right? Where we go, that is not a solution. Disconnecting is not a solution because it's, it's so essential to life. The work that you've done there with the wellbeing check, I'd really like you to just expand a bit on that, because human to human contact, gee, what a difference it makes, right? And what have you done to support your workers to know what to do in order to ensure that they walk away confident that they've been able to support? Because you're not a welfare or social services organisation. That, I'm sure that's what you've debated, how far you go. So could you speak to that particular initiative and how you've grappled with that, who you partnered with, what it looks like, the referral process? Do you want to, ask for help to make that something you could do on a large scale, and we could say, as the charter signatories, should be a routine part of what gets done?
Look, we find the way to deliver the best possible outcomes to the largest number of customers is to make things just part of the way things get done. And for us, we have what we call a disconnection checklist. Yep. And for any customer who makes it through to the potential for disconnection, we do have quite a lot of contact methods that we seek to make contact with the customer. And it ranges from phone calls to letters to SMS. And what we introduced over this reporting year was that wellbeing visit, which was inserted towards the tail end of that process after we've sent letters, after we've tried phone calls, and after we've tried SMSs, if we've got contact details. And the idea was just it was a fail-safe. The people that we used, we used two different approaches. In some jurisdictions where the network was willing to take part, we actually relied on the network staff to go out and have the conversation with the customer. And in Victoria, or in different parts of Victoria, we actually used a third-party contact agent. So it depended on the jurisdiction as to what we did. And we thought, on balance, we thought it was probably better if we were able to use the networks, but it wasn't always possible to do that. And then the intent of the person going out on that wellbeing visit is to make contact. Because if we can make contact with the person, we can have the conversation and just say, look, do you know, can we just ask, how are you going? And we're here to talk about electricity because we know that your bill hasn't been paid. So can we have a conversation about how you're going and whether you need support? And that's the focus of the conversation. It's, do you need support? For all of our customer interactions, from the wellbeing visit back to the bill, back to the conversation, we're always looking for the triggers, the signs that people are experiencing financial hardship that would then involve us going and moving that customer contact to talk to our hardship team to then work through what happens. If we can make contact and identify those hardship triggers, whether it's through a wellbeing visit or through any of our other contact channels, and get the conversation going, we get good outcomes with our customers.
Yeah. And Mark, can I check? And maybe it's Friday afternoon. I'm just scanning back through your disclosure. I'm trying to find the metrics on the success with that. So, you know, in terms of the number of people you've actually started that process with, through to the percentage that where you actually did end up disconnecting, and whether that's changed as a result of the, you know, further improvements you've made to that process. Is that somewhere in the disclosure?
I don't recall off the top of my head whether we did that particular comparative metric.
Okay.
The way that we looked at effectiveness was really the frequency by which we made contact. Right. And for us, it's all about getting the conversation and linking to the hardship program. The disconnection rates were less important than the conversation, because if we could identify the person and connect them into our hardship assistance team, then that's where we got the best outcomes. But we can certainly dig in and get those metrics. I don't know, Mark, if you've got any views on that from the top of your head.
I was just quickly scanning it, Mark, and if it's in there, I'll find it in a minute. But I think to adding to what Mark Collette said, it's the intent of us making contact with customers is to get them on our program for assistance. That's the intent. It's not to progress the disconnection process, and it's a very different line. So, you know, culturally, it's we need to tick a box to disconnect a customer. That's not where we're at. Everything we do is to try and get the customer onto our Energy Assist program so they can go on to one of the arrangements, and that can be anything through a payment plan to I can't pay. One of our team had a lovely story, a lovely but difficult story that I recall, is that we came across a customer that had been disconnected from it was the very early stages of this program, and it was a person that refused to be reconnected, and we couldn't quite understand why. And so we tried to engage with this customer, and you know what we found out in the end, it was, and they were living off esky and things like that. So you know, we had some conversations, and they didn't want their electricity connected because they couldn't afford to pay. So we connected their electricity, and we're paying for it all. Because the counterfactual was not a good life for that person. So we take responsibility for that electricity use and charges, and this person, you know, is able to trust us as an energy retailer again. So it's that intent of having better conversations.
Absolutely. And, you know, as I say, I think, you know, there's nothing more important than human contact to really understand what's going on and work out what somebody needs in terms of preventing a disconnection. So, but I do think it would be really valuable to show that if you have that interaction, you can virtually stop disconnections happening altogether. Because I suspect that's, if, you know, and you showing the greater investment you make in having that human contact will change the picture. Because it's not, you know, this is an industry-wide discussion, and we are predicting, we hope it's not the case, but we are predicting that we will see, you know, over the last 12 months, we've of course had income supports that were increased for people. We had a lot of focus on, you know, moratoriums on disconnection, so you just weren't able to do it. And of course, additional energy concessions or various crisis payment packages provided by state and territory governments. Now, most of that is disappearing or has disappeared already. And I'm not sure, I'm just looking again for the energy debt that you've got at the moment, but you know, where will the pressure points be? What do you see happening over the next 12 months? There's some things that are within your control, but if somebody's income has dropped dramatically, because of course JobSeeker, for example, is back at $45 a day now. Housing prices have almost uniformly gone up, rentals, and the energy bill and debts are sitting there. So that's what we see as this next stage. And with as a you know, larger retailer with a lot of customers, how do you plan to try and respond to that? So just if you could speak to the debt level you've got and what your thinking is about managing through the next period with that.
Yeah, maybe picking up a couple of those themes. The first one that I'd like to talk to is around the effectiveness of the wellbeing visits in taking disconnections to zero. And I think it would be fair to say that when we do manage to speak to someone and have the conversation, then it does avoid the need for a disconnection. It just takes it away because we know, okay, there's actually a person there and we can talk and engage.
Mark, can I interrupt you? Can we make that as a finding that you've confirmed that pretty much today, that's what happens? You don't just, once you can, if you can connect with the person, you end up not disconnecting typically? Is that correct?
I just want to check all the statistics.
Yeah, okay.
Right, but
okay.
Directionally, that's what we find.
Yeah.
But the wellbeing visit doesn't always result in a contact. And
sure, of course.
So if there are people for whom we've reached out with letters, with SMSs, with phone calls, and with a wellbeing visit who still don't engage, that's when disconnections do still go through the marketplace. And bear in mind that with the letters and with the other forms of contact, we are reaching out with some of the commentary in multiple languages. So we're trying to pick up the contact with the customer in every which way. Those are the problems we find the hardest, where there's no willingness to talk with us. It's either no willingness or no capacity to talk with us. And that's where the capacity piece, we sent out the wellbeing visit and the person was unable to communicate because it was a different language. Then that was great information for us, because then we could work on that and say, okay, we know there's a language issue here to overcome. But the one point I just did want to emphasise is that wellbeing visits won't take disconnections to zero because they still need to make contact.
And maybe I'll just add on that particular piece before you continue through, Mark, is that there is a group of customers out there who won't pay. It's not because they can't pay. And so when we do a wellbeing visit, for instance, for an unknown consumer, we can very well find people who have been deliberately manoeuvring around the system not to pay. And that's where it gets really difficult, because there's people who have genuine hardship who are unable to pay their bills, and then there is a small percentage that manoeuvre around within the system and won't pay. And that's where we have to make some really difficult decisions from time to time. So it's not as much a unilateral question of when we make a wellbeing visit, we get a lot of information that helps us. And as Mark was saying, then we also discover things. We go, aha, people that might be newer to the country and have distrust in some utilities in their home country or where they've come from. Of course, they're not going to engage with us because they're worried about whether it be safety or outcome. So, and our wellbeing visits aren't a debt collection. They're not giving them a
No.
bill. They're not
No,
they're providing
right.
information, and the
Yep.
information is with the intent to get them onto our Energy Assist program.
Mark, just on the that very sad but telling case that you described, I would bet that that person living using an esky may have been eligible for some sort of concession or help and maybe was not receiving it. And to be honest, our panel does not want to be talking about access to concessions and entitlements for the next 3 years. And we just, I know it's complicated, and I know there are a whole lot of issues to it, but heavens above, there must be a way of automating the process or making it a better relationships with the government agencies to just get this done so that, because it benefits the retailers, of course, as well as the customers, but it just seems to us such a gap that people are not getting their entitlements, and we just keep bringing up the same issue year after year. So would you, as a very large retailer with, you know, very intelligent systems, I imagine, have you got an answer for this?
In that particular instance that Mark quoted, the customer is actually an unknown consumer. So we still don't know the name or the details of the person. So in order to get them concession details, the most fundamental, who are you? And
Okay.
so we can answer that question. It doesn't matter how sophisticated our systems are. If the person won't talk to us and tell us what their name is, there's not a lot we can do about that today. Having said that, what we've been really impressed with has been the Department of Human and Health Services in Victoria, who have worked with the industry to make it an easier matter to lodge the various applications for support. And we've seen the application rate, as we've assisted customers, go from 30% up to around 75% of being approved. And that's a great outcome for customers. We haven't seen the same level of interaction in New South Wales, where they have the EAPA system, the EPAs. If we had some ability to authorise those even for unknown consumers, and the obligation is always on us if it's got public money to demonstrate that we have taken due diligence and care. But in that particular instance, even if we don't know the person's name, if they're living in an apartment off an esky, the chances are pretty good that they would qualify, as you say, for some form of concession. So as long as we had the due diligence there, we would agree with you. There's surely better ways than relying on being able to ID every customer and know enough about them to prove them, to have the same level of proof as a customer who can tell you everything about everything.
Mark, this is congratulations on this. This is a very human response for a big faceless utility to take, right? So it's been. Is there a business case that underwrites this? Is it just starting for you going through this process, starting to make sense financially to be doing this as well as ethically?
Look, it's the right thing to do, and that's where we start. If we look at the intent of all of the hardship assistance and vulnerability programs, the basic premise is there are some people who need support, and as the economics wash out across the industry, there needs to be enough in it to provide the support to those customers. It's fair to say we would probably say there's not enough in the industry at the moment to justify the investment, but it is, I think, to use an old term, COVID's been a Team Australia moment, and it's not an argument about who pays for what. It's a time for action, and that's the approach that we've taken there. We're very fortunate. We have a very supportive shareholder, CLP Holdings, based out of Hong Kong, and their starting point on matters like this is do the right thing, and that's the approach that we've taken. That said, if this happened each and every year, yeah, that would be a very difficult thing, I think, for individual players to support. But we recognise COVID's unusual. Having said that, most of the improvements we've put in, or the things that we've tried, rather, most of the things that we've tried all the ones that have worked, we will take into standard business practice, and then we'll make the case through the various vulnerability strategies around how the financials should wash through the industry.
Are you seeing early warning signs in the data that you collect to I mean, we've talked a fair bit about when a customer hits the ground. Are there early warning signs that you're picking up in the data that would stop them from hitting the ground in the first place and avoid all of this? So what kind of work do you do there in an avoidance strategy rather than a recovery strategy?
It starts with detection. So we use a few different ways to detect customers who may be experiencing hardship. We've got our internal measures, whether it's usage or payment history, things like that. And then we've got external ones around credit scores and things like that. And we do use all that to flag customers who may be experiencing hardship. We also train our staff to just listen for trigger words and to transfer to the hardship assist team, energy assist as we call it, whenever we can. That's all about detecting as early as possible so we can assist as early as possible. That assistance can be through government programs, as we've spoken about. Sometimes it can be through equipment swapping, appliance replacement, moving to a lower energy use piece. And in some circumstances, that's the best answer, both for the customer and for us. Early detection is probably the single best answer we have to that problem, Andrew, but it's not foolproof, and we certainly don't capture everyone. So we have to train our algorithms and our people, and then just listen. And for the people who we do catch, we then have to evaluate how could we have detected it earlier. It's an ongoing one for us.
It's a bit of a common theme too, with particularly the bigger utilities that we're talking to, and those that have that very much direct connection with customers, that it appears, particularly during COVID, it'll be interesting to see if it continues on. But during COVID, they've taken on more of a just an energy responsibility. So if you're a network in disaster recovery, then you're very active in the community. If in your case, you're sort of looking at things around vulnerability and people trying to move away from violent relationships and those sorts of things. Do you find yourselves getting into more of that social policy space? And if so, at what point do you say, right, well, we've done all that we can, and where are the partnerships to hand that over in a gentle way to make sure that person is looked after? Are you finding that that's a grey area that you need to get more clarity on, or are you happy with where it's at?
We're certainly seeing the same drivers of which you speak. I would say that it depends on the customer segment a little bit. So for the business customers, and particularly the small businesses, mostly that's an economic issue, and it is a case of working with the individual customer on the best way to face their circumstances, which might be payment plans or waiving disconnection, reconnection fees if someone goes into hibernation, that sort of thing. And we're really interested in doing what we can to make sure that customer comes back to life and to economic vibrancy, and that's the focus for that segment. For the residential customers, I think if you look at the direction of travel over the past decade, we are more and more into that social support approach. And whether it's family and domestic violence, or whether it's financial or other assistance for different forms of hardship, we're certainly getting tested. And on the one hand, our people are getting better and better at thinking about, well, we've just seen an edge case where someone had this experience. How can we take the learning from that edge case and put it back into the system so we get better detection? And on occasion, we're starting to see some of our people saying, well, you know what, the rules should be different and they should look like this in that particular case. And so, for example, I'll just use one from life support. When we have life support customers, we have an obligation that we do planned interruptions with at least 4 days notice written agreement. We've instituted a practice where our person turns up for a meter exchange for a planned interruption in one of the AER jurisdiction states. We'll only go ahead if our person can make physical contact with the customer and determine that the life support needs are met during the duration of the interruption. Now, that's not a regulatory obligation. The regulatory obligation is to have, say, a 24/7 phone line and to send a letter out. We think our approach is better. And off the back of that, we think that in some of these circumstances, the rules can be adapted to be better, or they can be more general in nature, looking at a better customer outcome, sort of going a little bit towards the case of even the application of concessions earlier. That's a different space. A lot of the consumer groups tend to look at us and say, well, we don't actually want you taking judgments on some of these potential outcomes, because they do have a view that there's been misbehaviour in the industry in the past. And I think there has been misbehaviour in the industry in the past. And if you go back in time, say a decade, I think most of the retailers looked at vulnerability as a form of credit management. I think the change that's happened, particularly in the past 5 years, is that most retailers don't see it that way. They see that part of the way we operate is we provide a social service now. And that's a very big change to the way the industry used to work. And I'd say we're still earning our stripes from some of the social groups to demonstrate that that's the way we're going about it.
Yeah. But can I, on that theme, I mean, we look at your highlights on affordability. I mean, that's a really massive number of 537,000 out of your whole customer base. That is a massive number of people who've been
very big year for payment assistance.
Unbelievable, right? And that is in a year when there has been elevated income support. That, I mean, it's not, we knew that the second half was going to be very different. The disaster payments were nowhere near as comprehensive as the JobKeeper and coronavirus supplement last year. So you might want to touch on that, whether you've seen a change over the course of this 12 months, in terms of the when it's really started to hit, in terms of people becoming distressed. What do you, maybe I'm not quite hearing as clearly is what you envisage being what you need to do, given that's not a small group, it's not a sort of a support, structural, that's big and structural. What you think will be the hot priorities for you now with that vision that you've got, which is great, seeing yourself as a connected social service organisation with a, essential life-giving supply, how to approach that. Data-driven approaches, the systemic solutions, and whether you will need to have a voice about income adequacy, things you don't have control over, Social Security or other parts of the picture, energy concession design and accessibility. A few of these things, as Claire goes, we've been talking about this for a while. Just an invitation for you to both step out what you plan to do with that, but also what you would like some others to do around you, government policy, for example.
I think it's fair to say that when COVID first hit, we expected quite a lot of impact on quite a lot of customers who would find it difficult to pay. And early on, a lot of those payment plans that you mentioned, the over 500,000, we saw a lot of preemptive payment plans, in the sense that people saw, I don't know what's going to happen here, maybe I'll just come up with an arrangement with EnergyAustralia so that I can just make sure I've got enough cash to get through this. And a lot of the potential impacts then didn't eventuate because of JobKeeper and JobSeeker and some of these other things. And so we've continually been looking forward and saying, well, will it come? Will it come?
Yeah.
The signs were pretty good when the lockdowns ended, in terms of people booming back in the sense of getting back to work and not seeming to be in an economically distressed state. Having said that, we still feel we haven't had clean air in the sense of opening up after lockdowns for some time. So it's something we worry about, but so far we haven't seen too many signals of distress. The things we look at the number of customers asking for payment plans. We look at the number of customers on our Energy Assist program. We look at the number of customers who are able to meet the payment plan they put in place, and that's been pretty good at, say, 85%, which is saying that we're pitching the payment plans at about the right level. So We
And-
thought
and
the
you-
impacts would be bigger, and we
Yeah.
thought we were having conversations earlier across the industry and with government saying that we were actually agitating for more support for customers. That said, we don't have the strength of the signals just yet. So we're watching, we're helping those who are facing hardship, but we just haven't seen the broader spread impacts yet. So
And in terms of that indicator, what's your trajectory on debt accumulation? Like what's the going up, coming down? Where are we heading on that?
well, there's two effects. There's a COVID effect, and it definitely went up when COVID started, and I don't think it's come down a bit, but I wouldn't say we're back to normal levels. But then there's also the seasonal effect, which is the effect that we get through winter, and at the moment that's the predominant effect. We theorize about this stuff all the time, and we think, well, is winter going to be the trigger that when these bills start to come through that we start to see problems manifest? We just haven't seen it hit just yet. It's something we're open to, and we've got a lot of thinking about different ways that we would start the conversation with governments and others around support, but by and large, we just haven't seen it.
I know we'll probably want to move on to a couple of other topics, though. I'm very grateful for staying with this for a moment, because you are one of the big picture, retailers. You can really help us to get a good sense across a number of jurisdictions as well. The bit about because what, of course, we know is that customers are typically the ones that actually adjust to try not to get disconnected. So, of course, we have people who do accumulate debt, but other people who modify their behaviour big time. They don't use. Have you seen much of that happening? Drop in usage that you would go, is this systemic, that we're seeing people who are, because of the housing prices going up, people have got to make the bills, cover the bills, and people, I think, have generally got very careful. And we might see some of the changes because people have not had to spend in other contexts, not as much socialising, out-of-pocket costs associated with participating in life on other fronts have been reduced. So that could be a factor. Just curious about whether you've seen any other behavioural changes that help to explain. Because as you say, policy-wise, you'd be going, it should be looking a bit grim at this point for some people, not for everybody.
Yes. It hasn't been something that's been one of the dominant narratives coming out of customer conversations. I mean, Mark, would you have more to add to that?
No, it's as a general trend. I mean, you've covered the impacts of COVID. Of course, we've been through this in this scale once before. We came out of the original big lockdown, and then we went into the second load of a big lockdown in Victoria, and of course the big lockdown in New South Wales. And what we saw coming out of the first big lockdown in Victoria was most of these measures we're talking about went relatively quickly back to there or thereabouts of the pre-COVID levels. That actually surprisingly fast. Winter included winter bills included. We haven't yet seen the tail of this piece, and it's bigger because, of course, it's New South Wales and Victoria will simultaneously hit by the same thing. Different industries locked down in different ways. So we did see a rapid rise of people reaching out for help, including businesses. So we also implemented what we call rapid business assist. So reached out to the small businesses. We had a fairly sharp increase in small businesses, at one stage over 100 per month seeking help. That's dropped off dramatically now, and those businesses are now coming and addressing their debts. They're wanting to address those debts. So but what's confused some of this, of course, is we've got people working from home and being at home. So I shouldn't say just working from home, being at home because they can't be out. So we're not seeing as higher increase necessarily in bills as we might have anticipated. So what our theory is there is that people are home longer and using more energy in gross terms, but being more efficient in the way they're using it. So the overall bill hasn't changed by as much as it could have. I still think there's room for more help across. You mentioned before, Claire, do we think we could get to a world, it was a rhetorical question, I think we could get to a world where nobody was disconnected. I think yes, we can. but it's not a retailer only responsibility. It's a retailer and government and the entire industry, because this is a social problem. It's not just the people that don't pay and or can't pay. So I think yes, but it's got to be a big collective, and that becomes even more important as we get more people coming onto solar. And we hear a lot of the network utilization. Less people using kilowatt hours through network means network companies' revenues need to be put across people who aren't generating their own, as an example. And what you get is you get a rising tide of things like access to system charges and the likes, which then accumulate for people who don't have self-generation with solar and batteries. So we can see that as an ongoing emerging problem that we think is becoming more urgent.
If it gives you any comfort, Mark, it will certainly be a strong theme of our report that the industry has a role in providing an essential service, but you can't solve all the problems alone, and that there are other players who need to be involved as well in exactly the way that you say. But I might quickly move to you, Andrew, if you have any questions that you'd like to raise.
In the few minutes we have left, Mark, let's tackle an easier subject, the transformation of the energy system to net zero by 2050 or sooner. completely
in 3 minutes or less.
Complete redesign of your business. And you made the tough decision around your lawn. You're making positive decisions with building batteries and Tallawarra, Kidston. You're doing some great stuff on demand response. But we think this is, we look at this at the moment and think that, wow, a lot of change is happening. Isn't this difficult? But when you look at the total decarbonisation of the energy system, we're just seeing the top of the iceberg poking out of the water. 95% of it is still underneath the water. So do you think there's an understanding of the scale that's required and that transformation that's required? And do you think there's enough collaboration occurring? Is sort of the first question. I'm probably thinking more around policymakers and others. Do they understand the scale of what's required? And then linking back to the previous discussion, how do we make sure that we put customers, and particularly vulnerable customers, at the head of the queue in the transformation of the energy system? Because there'll be lots of people who can buy Teslas and their solution will be parked in the driveway and will be on their roof and all those sorts of things. But equally, there'll be many, many more people who don't have the capital to have the access to that. So as one of the largest energy companies in the country, there's your thoughts on this would be really insightful, and what we need to do over the coming years, because COVID's taken 2 years. It's been a massive effort. Net zero by 20, whenever it is 20 years of the same effort, if not more. So in the few minutes left, it'd be great to hear some of your thoughts around what you have planned and the scale of the transition.
Fair bit in those questions.
You got 30 seconds.
Look, I'd say that there's two different timeframes that are coming on the energy transition. And one is what can we do now? And some of the actions you mentioned that we're taking are things that we can do now that are economic today and complement the renewables that are coming in that are economic today. And if we're going to start this transition, we've got to do everything we can immediately that's economic and just get underway. And so giddy up, we're off and running. And that's something that I think some segments of the community didn't realise, that some of those projects were as economic as they were, and they're starting to say, actually, we've got some real traction here that we can build on, and that's a great thing. And we don't want to slow that down in any way, but to your second point, I think the scale of the transition that is coming and the problems we still have to solve, I don't think the penny's dropped on all of those. And so, for example, one of the issues to solve is still, well, what happens when you do have a supply shock? If the system is mostly renewable, as the way the UK currently works, and you have a wind drought, what's the backup for the system? And at the moment, we have, say, 6 to 12 weeks of supply sitting on coal stockpiles and in gas storage facilities. And essentially, they're the buffer that provides the stability for the system. In the future, we won't have that. We'll have a lower emissions form of generation. but we need to make sure we have enough of a buffer to keep our system secure, so that it runs effectively and it stays affordable for all those customers. And that's where there's still more work to do across the sector, and with governments and others, on things like the design of capacity mechanisms that will ensure the system stays reliable and has a buffer to keep electricity as something that's affordable for everyone. In terms of then how does that get paid for, and how do we ensure that no one's left behind? Economic efficiency is really important. Make sure the cost of the system is as low as possible. And that's why good design on things like capacity mechanisms that might be the potential solution to some of the emerging problems, and also making changes to the existing system that ensure that we're not double paying for things. So for example, if we have a capacity mechanism, then we may not need the high price levels that exist in the wholesale spot market, for example. It's making sure the package of solutions is fit for purpose and as cheap as possible. Now, on the specifics of customers not being left behind, I think we start in a good space in the vulnerability support mechanisms we have today, and it's ensuring that they stay viable and that we continue to adapt them. There will undoubtedly be a few issues that arise through the energy transition. If we look at places like Texas and California, they've actually had some physical shortfalls, which if you look at electricity retailers in California, for example, and you go to their websites, they highlight that they can ride you through the grid going offline. Now that's fine if you can afford the solar and the batteries to do that on your own, but if you can't, that doesn't give you a lot of comfort. So it might be that the design of our vulnerability systems needs to adapt to provide more local support if we ended up needing that. But I'd hope that we play in the main game and design a power system that is economic and reliable so that we don't end up there. But there's certainly some lessons we can learn from those jurisdictions.
Yeah. So are you alluding to there, obviously, say a community battery where you can, rather than having panels on your roofs, you can take advantage of spilled energy that's gone into the battery. You can then participate in that lower cost environment. Is that kind of thing that you're thinking about? Or?
That's one potential approach. We have other thoughts. So one of the approaches we've got is we've got a combined grid and non-grid offering called Solar Home Bundle, where we provide a customer with a battery and solar and take away the upfront cost and just make the whole process simple. Instead of a community battery, potentially we could oversize the battery in that system and use that as the buffer for a local area. So there's different ways to go about it. I think it's really understanding if that's a problem we need to solve first. And as I say, I'd much rather solve for a power system where localized supply problems were a bug, not a feature, whereas California appears to be using that as a feature, not a bug.
Yeah, okay, that's a good way of putting it. Oh, you did well. It wasn't quite 30 seconds, but yeah, this is. Someone is. What another CEO said to us earlier today. Correct me if I get this wrong. We're aware of the scale of the transition, and it scares the hell out of us. That's not a bad place to be, actually, because at least it means you're paying attention and you're focused on it, rather than sort of just drifting along thinking it'll be okay. So yeah.
Well, that's right. And when you look at other sectors look to electricity and say, well, if electricity can get to zero carbon, then that enables our electrification to solve our problems. And so if it scares the hell out of you now, then it's going to doubly scare the hell out of us if we have electric cars across the whole of the country and a few other sectors electrifying.
Yep.
One of the things I'll add there on that, are probably two aspects. One is we let our customers access and help with the transition through our Go Neutral consumer product. And so we made a very clear and active decision that we don't charge customers to do that. There is a wait period where they're with us for a period of 6 months, and then they can have all of their carbon emissions offset for both their electricity and their gas. That's skyrocketed. So we've now just ticked over 400,000 applications for that program. It's growing, greater than 10,000 per month at the moment, and people are really starting to embrace, this is a way that I can do something because I'm going to consume energy anyway. And just on the, does it scare us? I think there's lots of words to describe it, but one of the things that we're really conscious of, and I think we're also really lucky in the energy industry, is that people are using as much of our product as they've ever used. They're in fact using more, and they're just it's been produced in different ways. So, it's being produced locally, whether it be through a solar panel, and rather than being produced at a big central emitting facility. And so, that gives us the opportunity to innovate around, because our customers are still using the end use, which is electricity, to do something to improve their lives. So that's a great space to say, we're in a market that has so much potential to keep growing. We've got to innovate in it. And that, to me, there's a little bit scary in some of the transition things, but it's also exciting in the opportunity to be able to get there and develop those solutions for the big problem.
Yeah, I agree. Final comment too. We focus a lot on residential and small business. I obviously represent large business. I will have to compliment you on your large C&I account team. They do an excellent job. If you want to pass that back to the guys and girls, they do an excellent job, and some really good product innovation around demand response. So well done.
Well, they also just launched the carbon neutral product into the commercial industrial market, and they've had a lot of customers take that up straight away.
Yep. Net zero, mate. It's all the way to go.
Appreciate the feedback, and we'll pass it on.
Yeah,
Sorry, Cass,
if
did
we
you
had
want
more
to say
time, we'd invite you to comment on the announcements during the week, but what a shame.
But just in conclusion, Mark, I think the things you've talked about today have shown the leadership role that you're taking in the industry. And we commented in our last report, and we'll probably comment on this report, about the absence from the Energy Charter of the other major retailers. And I think you're to be commended that you have stayed the course and shown that leadership within the Energy Charter, because we obviously think it's a really important thing. And I think people do look to you for that leadership. So it's congratulations on staying the course and doing the things that you've described today. So well done.
Thank you very much.
So on that note, thank you very much. We could have gone on, but we are out of time. So thank you very much for your disclosure and your leadership and today's discussion.
It's been great to have the chance to talk with you. Have a great weekend and see you soon.
Bye.
Thanks, Cassandra. Thanks, Claire. Thanks, Andrew.
Thanks.
Bye.